really delighted this week to welcome Christophe Egret from Egret West studio. I will go into a little bit more detail about what Christophe is going to talk about today shortly. Just for all those who joined us last week, we heard from Neil Chassor, our head of school, about the past in the future. Neil presented thinking and structure of his recent publications. So that will be available, I think, online, possibly by the end of term. We try to put all of our talks online soon after the series is complete. So look out for those. Next week, we will be welcoming Rochelle Spiteri from David Chipperfield offices, who will be talking about living spaces, landscape ecology, and residential typology. So to frame our week and for today, as I said, I'm delighted to welcome Christophe. Christophe has a really long-standing relationship with the LSA as a founding practice and a supporter of the school for the decade we have been around now. The name and the title, of the practice of the talk today is Placemaking, Rooting Design from the Ground Up. Christophe will be discussing his first-hand thoughts and reflections on rootedness, the value of embedding places within their context and communities. Studio Egret West design and curate places that cultivate sustainable communities, amplify nature and prioritise the public realm. Over the last 2 decades, the 70-strong team composed of urban designers, architects, landscape architects, graphic designers, model makers, filmmakers and thinkers have delivered some of the UK's most exciting high-quality placemaking projects. Christophe co-founded the studio in 2004 with David West, and he believes in the layering and symbiosis of memorable architecture, strategic urban design, and ecology-driven landscape, all of which contribute to designing rich and diverse neighbourhoods. This is echoed by the philosophy of the studio, which focuses on places that evolve naturally over time with compelling narratives and identities. So I hope that gives a fitting overview. Christophe will go into much more detail, tell us something about the practice, and then talk really through about 11 projects around that subject matter. So without further ado, I will hand over. Please, everybody, know that this is really an opportunity for you all to ask questions. We will leave time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So please prepare them. You can put them in the chat. Zafir, who guides us through this process, will happily help you do that and encourage you, I dare say, throughout. So please don't hesitate. This is an open forum. So encourage you to do so. Over to you, Christophe. It's the platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Thank you. Let me see how I'm going to do with my sharing of my screen. Start broadcast. Can you see my screen now? Good. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, the LSA, for inviting Studio Egret West to talk about their work. The talk I've called it Roots. And for us, it's quite important to think about buildings that are anchored in their context. And that can be through their materiality, that can be through keeping an old building and giving it a second life. It can be about the community that we are embracing, or it can also be much more to do with the context or anchoring it into a landscape. But before I go into the meat of the subject, I just wanted to give you a quick background on the studio and the people that are in it. As Samantha mentioned, 18, 19 years ago, David and I, David is an urbanist and I'm an architect, and we decided that architecture and urban design shouldn't really be separated. They should be kept together as a kind of the specificity of architecture and the strategy of urban design coming together. We're now 70 strong, kind of a young practice. We call ourselves a studio rather than an office, and that has a kind of quality of collaborativeness and of engaging with each other and kind of helping each other. So urban design and architecture are really important, but very quickly we found that landscape was the missing element. And the landscape in the old days was sort of like creating gardens and so on, but in a kind of dense urban environment, landscape is public realm. It's hard landscape, it's soft landscape, it's trees, it's nature. And so as 80% of the population eventually will be living in urban environment, how do we bring that nature? How do we bring that glue that holds the urban fabric together? And together, these three elements create what we describe, and now it's become quite a familiar word, placemaking, which to us is the essence of roots. Also, a quick overview about our studio. So this is both David and I sit at the front desk, a bit like at the reception. We want to be available. We don't hide at all. There are model makers. There are different members of staff, kind of in the same space, and we're lucky to be on the ground floor. The other thing that I kind of learned from my past working with Will Alsop and with Nigel Coates and with a number of other people, was that drawing is a really important element, and there's something very direct and very a process of discovery through sketching that computers don't always achieve. And I kind of try to instill in people that you should use a computer, but you should also not forget the drawing skills. And most of our projects start with a sketch, a hand sketch, a watercolor, a painting, a doodle. And across the board, this is Jarell's sketches, which are really about, placemaking and finding roots and what happens in the different spaces. Freddie will draw much more the volumes of the building and how to integrate them into the context. While Duncan, our director of landscape, kind of immediately starts with the landscape and kind of integrates the architecture around them. But all of this happens within the context of hand sketches. I mean, there are also people who go straight to the computer and who do wonderful things. So I'm certainly not denigrating other methods of creative discovery. Propositions is because, as I said, we have a studio that is on the ground floor. We've got people cycling past our studio, and so it's a great opportunity for us to have a showroom. And in that showroom, we kind of test our thought leadership, and we think about play, we think about the future of High Street, we think about recycling, we think about the future of car parkings, we think about the future of the workplace. And so all the time, this kind of gives us a platform for discussing, thinking, researching, and eventually presenting in our showroom the outcome of our thought. And I think that's, for those listening, I think it's kind of really important that you kind of find the next thing that is important to kind of dwell into in terms of architecture and urban design. One of our latest one was food for thoughts and how we can create sustainable food production in an urban environment. And more recently, I think still on, if you're interested, we've got a co-create with AI being the element of co-creation, where artificial intelligence helps people in the community to draw what they imagine in their mind and have a kind of more balanced conversation with the architectural and design team and client team in the consultation process. So back to roots, and I guess this is sort of the what I remember from my education of architecture. I was kind of trained into architectural modernism and very much a tabula rasa, erase the past, start with a clean slate and put your buildings. And these buildings had a kind of lack of root. I can only say it like that, in the sense that they could be in New York, they could be in London, they could be in Buenos Aires, and there was something quite unsatisfactory about that. And I guess that is what our practice is reacting to, and I guess we're not the only ones. Most people are also reacting to that. I'm showing the Peckham Library, which is a project that I was working on when I was a director at Will Alsop's practice, and I remember at the time thinking, oh, maybe this is an object that is kind of landed like a little animal in Peckham Square, but actually, in retrospect, I felt that it was really quite rooted, because that lifting of the building allowed that east-west route that was so important to kind of place the main, to preserve the main square, and to then create a kind of roof over what would become the local food market and other events. So in a way, even though in terms of pure contextualism, this was not a building that kind of fitted with the context, because of its form, it kind of really did have interesting roots. So I thought I would try and kind of distill the roots idea through a number of projects. And the first one was the Shawl in Stratford. This is just before the Olympics. The Stratford Centre is kind of turning its back to the Olympics. We've got the face of the car park, and the client says, could you create some beautiful nature, some trees in the back of this old shopping centre? And we said, well, we don't have time to grow the trees. There's lots of fiber optics in the ground. What we could do is create this titanium leaves kind of nature that moves in the wind instead. And so we created this even on a north-facing facade, this kind of titanium shining surface can catch the light of the sky and kind of create an environment that kind of helped to set the placemaking of what would then lead to the grand stair that would cross over the railway and then into the Olympic site. These are a few pictures of the site. Really quite an important project for Studio Egret West was the renovation of Park Hill. And Park Hill has a long history. It's a kind of Corbusian social housing project with streets in the sky, probably several kilometers of corridors, and it's on the edge of Sheffield. And it's one of those projects that was absolutely ordinary, and yet kind of dropped onto the landscape, but the public realm was not really well thought through, and the project was falling apart. It became a little bit antisocial, and I think there was many conversations to kind of demolish this building. And with the help of Urban Splash that bought the site, we worked with Hawkins Brown on this project. we looked at the transformation, how to keep this project. And the first thing that we did was to anchor it, to completely redesign the landscape, to kind of all the straight roads would become lanes. Each little environment, rather than being a kind of token green space, would become a specific garden with areas for allotments, areas for play, areas for peace, areas for picnics and sociability. And immediately that really transformed the space. So we went all the way back to the raw structure. We added color, and the color and the glazing of the facade was quite important in terms of letting more light in, kind of turning the page and kind of creating a step change. I remember Jonathan Falkenham from Urban Splash saying it needs to change to be able to attract people. And then you see the same image with curtains and with people and with washing and with trees. Immediately transforms the space. And then very quickly, we put also 3 levels of offices at ground level to create mixed use, to create employment, to create activity at ground level. And very quickly, the ice cream van came along. We also had to kind of recreate the elements of originally in Park Hill, there was pubs, there was nurseries, there was even a tiny little police station. We created a new nursery, and we used the ground spaces around that. And so immediately, the first phase of Park Hill was anchored on an inviting landscape. People, it had become a no-go area, and now suddenly people wanted to go to Park Hill and pass through it. And it was a place that since then has been, other architects, Michael Ritchie and others have been involved in the second, third and fourth phase. And so not only is it no longer the hand of one architect, it's the hand of 4 or 5 different architects with all their different qualities, visions, crafts. And that creates an interesting diversity in itself. We took great care about, the streets in the sky, and had to create windows and had to create little recesses for communities to kind of get to know each other. We created, as I mentioned, some office spaces. And these are some of the, also at the bottom 2 images, some of the flats. Moving on to another project, the old vinyl factory. This is where EMI, his master's voice, would print records, and it was a kind of little village in itself, with places to make the cabinets for the record players, the vinyl press. There was a boiler room to heat water and to melt plastic, and it had a little train station in it, and it was really a little village. And it was kind of, this is where the Beatles songs were recorded and the records were printed, and it was kind of really busy place. And then as many things do, it fell into disrepair. The record industry was no longer as strong as it was before. And the question mark was, what do you do with these extraordinary buildings? And we inherited, we're in Hayes, by the way, we're just west of central London. And the proposal that we inherited was to keep some of the existing buildings, build some new buildings, and to fill the rest of the site with car park. And we thought, that is terrible. This is not a sense of destination, of place. So we embraced, we created meanwhile uses, we engaged with the community, we started to embrace the space. We were working with UNI and what used to be Cathedral. And we kind of really were intrigued by the different names of the different buildings. And immediately that helped us to find some roots and find some history, and look at how we could mix offices, universities, housing, museums, and create a really rich mixed use. And one of the things that we had to do was to create 2 multi-story car parks to get rid of that kind of empty ground level space and to be able to put more buildings that created a sense of place. And the bottom right, the gramophones were part of the landscape. The car park had the oops, have I lost? I've lost my screen. We printed on the multi-story car park the screaming fans from the Beatles, and then the sculptor made a large dog to represent his master's voice. Quite a beautiful car park, sort of really one of the rare car parks that really has color and light and details. Offices, and even the powerhouse, which was where the turbines making electricity would be transformed into a shared co-working environment, and the old boiler house would be turned into the largest timber structure with inclined space at the time. So this was, I think, 50 homes made of a timber structure and stainless steel spaces. But again, by making sure that the powerhouse and the boiler house still kept their names, we were also still keeping a memory of the site, of the part of the history of the site. These are some of the interiors of the boiler house. Caxton Work is a different project. It's in Canning Town. What's interesting about Caxton Work is that it was very much an industrial site, and it was also falling into disrepair. Some of the many of the units were empty, and the proposition was to keep the warehouses at ground level and then to build housing above it, and that was the essence of Caxton Works. So these are some of the warehouses in the history of the site. And I guess that the issue with industry is that all the time it's being pushed to the edges of the city, and it's sort of we kind of need a step change to try and keep industry within the kind of urban environment, and then put housing on top of it. And that always kind of creates a little bit of conflicts in terms of noise, in terms of pollution, in terms of access and lorries and so on. So kind of a careful approach is required to make the industry and residential work together. As we generally do on most projects, we create meanwhile uses. And meanwhile uses is a way of using the time when you're designing to still use the site to make use of it, and for the community to be aware of that site. And by making the community aware of the site, they kind of embrace the change and kind of want to follow the evolution of the design. And in this instance, we invited the House of Fairy Tale, which is an education kind of mini circus, education for children kind of environment, to use the space for free while we were designing this new building. And so we started with sketches. We looked at how we could create a raw industrial base, and then residential buildings that were also kind of industrial in quality above. And that led to an environment of Core 10 and kind of shutters that could close off and make the industry secure, and then residential above. And these are some of the views. and making sure that signage was clear, and then just lifting a few curves on the roof to create an interesting, memorable silhouette to the buildings. And now the ground floor uses have a climbing wall, a bamboo cycle factory, a bread maker, and a few other facilities that are really helping to bring life to the ground floor of Caxton Works. Next on my list, we're sort of nearly halfway through. New Bermondsey is hidden away. A lot of people don't know where it is, but if you look carefully, the Millwall Stadium is in the middle, hidden along between two railway viaducts. We looked at the site. I'm going to maybe speed up a little bit because I'm aware of time. And these were the historical maps. And this was sort of we are on the Surrey Canal Road, lots of timber coming and bricks coming along through the canal, and there was old arches and there's the stadium. So we had a kind of complex environment to deal with. But there was also a kind of burgeoning sporting community and a community of artists that were also occupying the site, but they didn't really have a defined home. So we consulted with them, obviously, and so the main gesture of our move was to take the first 3 stories of practically the whole site and dedicated it to creating a sense of community. So there was the energized center was the sporting center with the climbing wall. There was there's a new station top right. There was a kind of creative market and creative industries on the bottom left, and then Surrey Canal Road was the and then we also integrated the new stadium by other architects. And one of the first phases is called Orion, and it's 3 towers sitting on this green podium that is sort of at the same height as the viaducts on either side of the buildings, and has inside it an auditorium, and on top of the auditorium, on top of the podium, a community garden that brings all the community of the 3 towers together. And these are some of the views of those spaces. Smithfield Market is interesting because for those who don't know, the meat market is going to move to Barking and Dagenham together with Spitalfields and the fish market. And so our task was to kind of imagine what this building could become. And it's sort of like an umbrella over a large part of the city. And one of our first thoughts was to kind of keep the memory of the meat market, kind of create a kind of food market that was celebrating food production, the memory of meat making and meat hanging and so on. But making the Grand Avenue a space that was really inviting people. And the main theme of it is also to be the home of the creative industries. So whereas Paris have the Grand Palais and Milan has its own dedicated creative quarter, Frieze is still living in a tent in Regent's Park and so on. So a home for the creative arts and for creative industries is really important. And what we discovered is this extraordinary car park underneath Smithfield Market, which was linking to the Metropolitan line and distributing meat across the country. And so we continued the theme of food. created environments for showcasing Fashion Week and things like that. And then in the basement, got rid of one level of car park and created this double height space that steps up to the Grand Avenue for large exhibitions and events like Freeze and so on. And that leads to a tunnel to what is this extraordinary spiral that is next to Bart's Hospital, and then covering it with glass and creating a landscape and creating a really beautiful entrance to the creative industries headquarters. Moving on to Mayfield. Mayfield is in Manchester. It used to be the Mayfield station used to be the overflow station of Piccadilly station. Most people would come to Manchester. They didn't live in Manchester. They would come to work. The printing press, the fabric, the textile, the coloring, all of this industry was happening in Manchester City, and people were coming into the city. And so this dedicated station was created. And when we were pitching for the competition, the proposal was to demolish the whole site and to demolish the station. And we were the only team to say, no, we can't demolish this structure. The structure is extraordinary. It's got these arches, it's got this landscape, it's got these ramps, it's got these extraordinary paved spaces, and underneath, extraordinary spaces underneath the arches. And our vision prevailed. And what we did, this is a kind of CGI of the vision of the future. But what we started with is to say, let's keep the existing buildings. Let's bring the deculvert the river that crosses the site. Celebrate the spaces that are underneath the arches, and create a new park. And there's a lot of parkland around Manchester, but there is practically no parks in the center of Manchester. And now Manchester has become a very large city where people actually live in the center. And so we did something that we refer to as landscape-driven urbanism, which is that we start with the landscape and then allow the buildings to come along it. So very much we started with the landscape, and there's this famous quote by the Smith: amid concrete and clay and general decay, nature must still find a way. And so that was a theme that we used to kind of design the landscape and still keep the industrial theme and the connection with the past alive. So we kept the arches and the structures on the left. We opened up the river. We created different kinds of landscape for play, for relaxation, for sports, and so on. And then you can see in pencil, the architecture will come later. And again, like all the other key projects that I've shown, meanwhile uses have been really successful. The Mayfield has become a destination for events, for food and beverages, for dancing. And so these are very much part of the process of discovering what the future of this site will be. And so the river Medlock before, the river Medlock today. So this is now a finished project. Still with keeping some of the old brick walls, keeping some of the industrial bridges. This is the main lawn, and then inviting children to play as kind of semi-industrial kind of structures. And I have to say, it's been a really quite successful destination. A lot of people are saying, "Wow, we needed a kind of a park of that kind." This is the different spaces. This is 6.5 hectare of open space in central Manchester. four more projects to talk about. Am I okay, Samantha, to continue? Balfront Tower, which
yes,
is
sorry. You're doing
okay.
just fine, Christophe. I'll wave when you need to.
Very good. All right. Balfront Tower is a project that we're really fond of, in the sense that it's again like Park Hill, a project where it was, could have been demolished, was saved by being listed, grade 2-star, and yet it was in great disrepair, and it is sort of iconic silhouette of the A13 when you kind of drive past and see this service tower and these buildings. And so how do you give this building a second life? And similarly to, so it's a 1963, 1965 building by Erno Goldfinger. There was key issues of acoustics, of thermal breaks, of fire separations, of the need for sprinklers and so on that had to be integrated into this old structure. But essentially, again, landscape was what was driving starting point, which is this was in landscape term, architects of the 60s thought they knew about landscape, but they didn't really. They just talked about generic green spaces, and it was very compartmented with lots of fences and sort of play area for children that was made of raw concrete that really were not suited to young children. So we proposed a number of different acoustic landscapes, lavender gardens for the smell, play areas, and so on. And so we defined 7 key gardens. That was before, and we immediately got rid of the barriers and kind of integrated the landscape, made the play area really work together, and then really drew, you can see the images before and after of the landscape. And then the sense of arrival. Council House intended to have a kind of slightly dour approach to arrival, and we kind of softened that a little bit. And this is the landscape views. And then the other thing that we did and concentrated our mind was it was a vision by Erno Goldfinger of having the service tower filled with a music room and a playroom and different spaces, but they remained like service spaces that had no main use. So coming back to the flats, we kind of kept some as heritage flats to keep the memory of the arrangements of the flat as before. But Abe Rogers Design and ourselves divided the whole interiors into 2 different ways of approaching the design, but really more open plan kitchen and living spaces brought together. We changed the facade. We cleaned the concrete. This is the before and after. So from a squint eye kind of way of looking, the building is absolutely the same, but the concrete is clean. The windows have another 100 years life. The canopy at the very top has been restored, and the ground level uses are brought to life. This is a kind of still the building being repaired, and this is the building today. So a new entrance, new cladding, and really lovely, wonderful flats with wonderful balconies, and then the mixed uses of the service tower with a kitchen, a yoga room, a new play area, a music room in the service tower. There's all sorts of different activities happening, so that you can live in your flat and then you can go to the service tower to do other activities. I think I'll go really quickly through Albert Bridge because it's another project in Manchester. It's got housing and offices. I'll just really quickly go through it because it is really rooted. It does respond to the river well. It is a gateway to Manchester from Salford, but it's just a really, and it thinks about post COVID, how do people want to work in offices with open spaces and flexibility of work. And how do you then step it down to kind of come back to the scale of other buildings? I could stop here, or I could quickly. I don't know if there's a lot of questions. I'll list two more projects: Bath and Clapham Library. But I'm really relaxed about presenting them. So,
well,
I don't know.
I would just go for it, Christophe, and then we've got a couple of questions lined up. But
okay, I'll go for it in 5 minutes then. Bath Western Riverside is an interesting project because Bath, as most of you know, is a UNESCO protected city, and there is a kind of uniformity of materials and a kind of reticence for tall buildings and so on. So. But we have these curves of the circus and the curve of the crescent, and we thought, this extraordinary Victorian environment has kind of a really rich heritage. And then we looked at the Roman bath and looked at the stone that came from it, and we looked at the rust from the iron in the water. And so we did all this research, and then we looked at how you could curve stone, and looked at precedents of curving stones, and looked at how balconies in Bath had been made, and they are gently in front of the stone facade. And so this led to two pavilions on the edge of the river that kind of curve. And I remember the planner saying, our brains are not straight, they are curved. And why should those buildings be curved? And indeed, because the building didn't have a back, they were sort of pavilions. We approached them as two curved buildings framing a new park. We did a number of sketches. We kind of integrated the orange reveals into the facade. We created a courtyard in the center. And we then carved this kind of soft building, probably the tallest building, but because of its softness, because of its stepping, because of the integrated balcony, there's no jutting out balcony, they're all stepping back. The building actually feels like very comfortable on the edge of the river. We put some mixed use at ground level. We brought this kind of orange color as theme, as a kind of the rust from the metal water of the Roman bath, and then we created this atrium in the center. And now it's become those two buildings are kind of important in front of Brunel's bridge. Last project, Clapham Library, really important project for us because that was a building that existed prior to the building. It was called Mary Seacole House, and Lambeth needed a new library and a new health centre, and they didn't know what to do with this building. And so we created a building that was just the same height as the original building, but kind of stepped to kind of create communal terraces, to step down to meet the two up, two down Georgian terraces, lifted up to kind of really create a library that was inviting at ground level, and imagined a kind of a library space that was really open to the public. These are early sketches, an environment where it's one spiral kind of leads, kind of is the wall on which the books are presented, but also the spiral creates a communal space which becomes where children learn to read. So the children are at the center of the library. Parents with their prams come down in the morning and come together into this space. So a library really very much at the center of this community. These are a few sketches of the space. I'm going a little bit fast because I want to keep time for questions. And then we put on the outside of the library these large letters that Andrew Logan built. And he asked the community to give him lots of little bits and pieces that he then triaged into different colors. And what we now have is the big letters of library. We've glued onto them, and they've been glued there for over 10 years, so it must have been really good glue into their different color codes. And children will remember that they gave one of these bits and pieces to this library. But it's extraordinary how the word library, these objects in front of the library, immediately a child would pull his mother or father towards them and want to sit on them and look at them, and you're halfway through to inviting children to come into a library, which is always a challenge. Thank you very much. This is the end of the talk.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Well, that was an amazing tour around the country, really, and various parts of it, and touched on so many interesting themes, many of which we won't even get close to sort of responding to, I don't think. But I think what I will do is I suppose as I said, so many. I think that the business of text, I will go in there. The business of text and your buildings and buildings that you have produced is such a fascinating one. There's clearly a relationship, and in your list of collaborators, or certainly members of your team, you list graphic designers, and there is obviously a kind of history of text and building, the whole kind of period of turn of the last century with paintings of advertising literally painted onto building sides, and you see sort of shadows of that remnants now, but then also one thinks of the Oxo Tower and sort of tended to be about advertising of the contents of the building, and now you're using it very much as sort of memory and also clues to where, as you just described, leading a child to a library. Yeah. I just wondered if you said just a little bit more about.
Well, okay. So architecture, you often need to create a story, and so the narrative in which you present architecture, you list two ways of presenting architecture. You can resolve problems, and here's a car park, and here's the entrance, and here's and it's sort of like there is no poetry, or you can create a narrative, and you create a story, and you create more often than not, the best way to start a story is to start with what happened before, and I think that you're kind of helping me to come to the crux of the matter, which is that if you start with a tabula rasa, you're saying that the past didn't exist, that nothing happened before, and that we're cleverer than the past, and therefore we're going to. And there was a certain arrogance about the modernist era, and I think we've all changed, and I think that's worth celebrating. And so, you're referring to the old vinyl factory. The moment we found this old map of the old vinyl factory with the cabinet room and the cabinet building and the boiler room and the powerhouse and the this and the everything came to life. And when we did the landscape, we tried to write the names of all the songs that had been recorded on the floor, and so suddenly you kind of it's about the history of music and what happened in the 60s and records and gramophones. The gramophone museum is now on the site, and you can see the printing press, and it's extraordinary to see this piece of plastic being pressed, and suddenly, yes, you understand where you've come from. You understand your roots, and so the naming of buildings is really important. The history of buildings is important, and then I find that it also helps to shape how you then imagine your future. That's the purpose.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to jump straight to there. We've got a few questions in the chat room, and we've got precisely 9 minutes to answer them. So we'll keep them quite tight. Elliot asks, with so much work in public realm, I was wondering what processes and parameters your studio has in analysing the intended and or successful use of spaces you've designed. So I guess it's a bit of analysis, yeah.
Of course, we go on site, we analyze, a difficult question to answer, but I would say that the public realm, it's a personal feeling, but urban environments can be alienating. More concrete, less nature, man-made objects all around you, and sort of. But the reason why we all come to cities is for social cohesion. We want to meet other people, and historically, kind of modern cities have been built around the car, and therefore the car has dominated our environment. I remember London 30 years ago, crossing the Euston Road. It was impossible walking from, King's Cross to Oxford Circus was not a pleasant experience, and we've seen a real transformation of London and other big cities in terms of the quality of the public realm, in that the pocket gardens and wider pavements and more trees and eventually, I'm imagining with the electric car, with the self-drive car, with less cars in streets because we won't own cars, the streets will become wider, and children, like Lowry's paintings of Manchester of the turn of the century, will be able to play again in the street. And so I'm not sure I'm answering the question in this quite same vein, but it's quite important that the public realm is the space that 90% of people experience architecture. Very few people go inside a building, but they experience the outside of the building, and therefore it's really important. And I would just add that nature, but also biodiversity, shading, water, suds, all these things that kind of the more London is kind of really quite a green city compared to many other cities, and that's why it's successful. It's actually successful because of its green spaces, and because we've inherited this large metropolitan park like Regent's and Hyde Park. But yes, it's essentially a place of play and a place of social cohesion and a place of experience where the human scale is critical.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I think that comes close to answering it. I suppose I would say the other part of that is really about a lot of observation. I mean, you clearly spend time looking at not only your own designs but other spaces where it's successful, where public spaces and spaces where communities come together and gather, and how they work, how that works. And I suspect London isn't the only place you look, but I may be speculating.
Well, I spent my early 20 years in Paris, so promenading, walking, being able to walk from one place to another or cycle is really a very different experience from driving, I think. And I think we are moving away from cities that are designed around the car. And American cities have linear streets that have there's no lanes, there's no hidden spaces, and to my mind they fail, and some other cities also fail at that.
I think that probably touches on another question, which it sort of touches on a similar area from Jay, who asks about similar strategies to how to gather people together. So I'm going to, if we do have time, and we've only got 4 minutes left, we'll come back. But I think we've covered that very different questions. One, I think, is a probably fairly succinct answer, I hope, and another maybe a little bit more broad. But Jazz asks, and this is quite a different one, considering your involvement on Balfron Tower, how do you feel as an architect that the future of the building is now under consideration, as 139 properties were withdrawn from market due to failure to sell? I'd be interested to hear from what your thoughts are on the future of the building.
I think I understand that it is going to be for the rental market. It's not. It's been completely. I actually probably don't mind it being for the rental market rather than for sale. It is actually something a little bit more socialist about it, in the sense that you can't kind of personally speculate on it. I think, the most important thing is for the building not to be demolished and to be given a second life. And then that's the role of the architect and the urban designer. We can't control everything. So I probably have private thoughts about all of this, but it's not in our control. But what I do think is that this whole area will benefit from the richness of social housing and for rent housing and so on, as long as the cost of the rental is controlled and that there is security of long-term living there. The laws on rental need to be upgraded to meet our European neighbors. France, Germany, Denmark, all these countries look after their rental sector much better than we do.
Thank you very much. Points well made. Okay, for another different one, and I think this may have to be our last. There is a question about how do we go more sustainable than concrete, but that may come up another day as well. So I let's see how we get on. How does the studio go about choosing and using colour throughout its design? Are colour psychologists used? Is it playful, creative impulse?
That's an interesting. I think we are known for enjoying color, not being shy of it. I know that color is a really good way of creating visual excitement, and when the sun is shining, the colors come to life, and there's something really kind of sad sometimes when you it's all polite bricks and sometimes you refer to grayness as polite modernism, sort of white or kind of, and and what you want to avoid is kind of screaming colors everywhere and it's chaotic, but sometimes you take a theme of yellow, or sometimes you take a theme of transparency, or you just create good graphics. And it's a very cost-effective way Mexico is a really good example of places where color is really strong. Africa is a really good example of buildings where color is used at great effect at very low cost, and it creates memorable place. And I'm really pleased that Peckham Library is green, and I'm really pleased. Color, we need as architects to be more confident and more bold with color without becoming darker.
Great. Well, look, Christophe, it's 1400 hours.
Wow.
It goes so fast. But I think that's a fantastic place to end.
Okay.
You have one more thing to say, I can tell.
No. It's just you mentioned the concrete. We think about concrete all the time. There is graphene and new concretes that allows you to go thinner, and every effort of our working life has to be focused on using less, burning less stuff, and using less material. I heard yesterday that our buildings are 50 times over structured to avoid them wobbling and so on. We could reduce that to 20. A plane is only 10 times over structured, and a building is 50 times over structured. We maybe need to kind of use less over everything. And I know that in our studio we think about that all the time. And,
amazing.
It's
well, it's a very good, it's a good cue also to think about, who are the other people that you work with on creating your buildings, and all of the other forces that come to bear on the design of those structures, and those are the other disciplines that one has to challenge also, which I think is really fascinating from what you've talked about. Christophe, it's 2 minutes past. I'm about to break. I think I've now broken my track record of finishing bang on 2:00. So I'm going to let everybody who have now very much, I expect, finished their lunch and allow you to go and have some lunch. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very sure we could have at least another few hours to discuss all the other things that you raised, but we'll do that another time, I hope. Welcome back, everybody, next week to join us for a talk from Rochelle Spiteri at David Chipperfield Architects. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you've had a very good lunch, and see you next week. Thank you, Christophe.